This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
What do you guys want to talk about?
I was hoping to try and record at least part of the audio here on Saturday night. I've been trying to modify the days where I actually piece together the audio. This collision thing, it's kind of thrown everything out of whack. I used to have Sundays relatively open after about 1 o'clock. Now it's taken up most of my mid-afternoon just to sit down and try to find the time to watch that show. Sometimes if I'm lucky enough, I might have time to watch some of the Crockett TV shows if I get through Collision in reasonable time. It's very unpredictable, though. I mean, I rarely get the opportunity to get through those Crockett shows in one sitting. Thankfully, the WWF and WWE content this week was not too noteworthy, so we can probably blast through that with no issue. The Collision report might take a little more time. Right now, I'm still treating that show like they're at least trying. They're attempting to do pro wrestling, as compared to Dynamite, where it's borderline impossible for me to watch that show without holding the remote in one hand. Before we run down all the good stuff, if you're checking out the show for the first time, do me a solid, subscribe, like the show, comment, all the things that help small channels like this prosper. I would greatly appreciate the support where I can get it. The FSWR channel is active on Mondays and Fridays. We also upload to Rumble as well, so you can check the show out there. We're cruising along in our recaps of modern and classic wrestling. At this stage, it's hard to even judge what the real driver of this channel is. I've looked at the analytics. People usually stick around to listen to my Friday shows. Sometimes the Monday shows pop numbers occasionally, depending on what I'm talking about. The SummerSlam review we did last weekend, that actually garnered a decent amount of viewership. Probably a lot of straggling viewers, not returning viewers. I think the Friday show comes with people just dialing in to hear me moan and groan about how bad Dynamite is. There's just something about that kind of appeal, you know? The appeal of ripping into a wrestling show that's so ungodly terrible, everybody recognizes it. So it's like the train wreck form of entertainment where people just like listening to you suffer through the BS. Because Lord knows that's where I am with Dynamite these days. AEW as a whole, if I'm being frank. And then there's WWE that's just kind of tagging along for the ride. Few things worth mentioning about here and there, but most of the other stuff is just blech. Kind of like what Retro Raw is a lot of the time. 45 minutes of blech. Which I guess is better than 2 or 3 hours of it, but anyway. What do you say we get going and dive into the Monday magnificence? What should we start with? Retro Raw, I guess? Sure. Let's do that first. We're now officially 2 weeks out from SummerSlam 94, which I now just realized. I'm going to need to make room to review that show, which evidently means that something's going to have to get pushed to the back burner again. I mean, the sacrificial lamb is usually SmackDown, but shit. Is that the same week as the Wembley show? Is that when we're going to have to review that pay-per-view? Crap. I'm going to have to figure that one out. Because that's going to be a long pay-per-view to talk about. And if I'm trying to be thorough in my breakdown of everything, I don't want to half-ass that. I'll figure it out. I'm a problem solver, goddammit. That's what I'm born and bred for. So anyway, we're still dealing with this $1 million corporation falderall. Is taking center stage on virtually every Monday Night Raw for the entire summer. Meanwhile, there's a Bret Owen WWF title feud that's getting wedged somewhere in the middle of all that. Clearly not important. You know, despite the fact that it's their top belt. God, I don't even remember the last time we've seen Bret make a physical appearance on this show. Again, despite the fact that he is their top champion, their number one babyface. I think he was off filming a movie at the time, which explained the long extended absence. I don't know if anybody ever mentioned that. Savage and Vince surely haven't brought it up. Because, trust me, I mean, I would have remembered that. Owens made plenty of appearances. Bret, not so much. And in fact, Owen was in the opening match this week against the 1-2-3 Kid. And during the opening minutes here, Vince and Savage were mentioning the Bret 1-2-3 Kid match about 4 or 5 weeks ago. And now that I'm recalling that, that may have been the last time Bret was actually on Raw. What a title reign that guy had. Now, of course, the wrestling between Owen and Waltman here was fantastic. All throughout the match. I can probably count on one hand the amount of wrestlers I've seen not only bridge out of a sunset pinning predicament, but actually do the kip-up spot. That is what Owen did, as Waltman had his shoulders pinned down for an early 2 count. Owen not only bridged up with his hands clasped around Waltman's waist, but he actually did the Shawn Michaels kip-up before turning him over into a backslide. Remarkable. What an athlete that guy was. And it's all back and forth in the early goings. And right as they go to break, they had Waltman take control and do a couple big high spots to Owen and Neidhart. They come back with Owen dumping Waltman out to the floor with an apron suplex. Starts working over his back for the heat. And they eventually build to this great spot right before Kid's comeback. Owen goes up top for a knee drop, but he misses. And it's so great because Owen immediately gets up and starts limping around the ring, pointing at his knee, looking at Neidhart like, dude, my leg's fucked. And meanwhile, the 1-2-3 Kid, upon realizing that Owen is visibly limping, says to himself, this is my chance. And he immediately goes after Owen's leg in the greatest revenge angle of 1994. 8 months after Owen kicked Bret's leg out of his leg at the Royal Rumble, now the tide has turned. And it is Sean Waltman returning the favor on behalf of Bret by kicking Owen's leg out of his leg. Fucking genius. And it's all going relatively well. And then as I wrote down, we get a totally lame finish. So Sean goes to put Owen in a single leg Boston Crab. The fans are passionately chanting, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And then Neidhart just hits the ring and attacks Waltman for the blatant DQ. I was like, really? That's what you came up with for the finish? And of course, the heels are immediately beating down Waltman afterwards. You had Owen cranking on him in a sharpshooter while Neidhart was rubbing his face in the mat. Kind of just a generic basic heat angle. And meanwhile, another week goes by where Bret is not on the show. Because he's off doing other things. Despite the fact that we're like 2 weeks out from this huge title match at the Big Four pay-per-view, and the world champion has been MIA for like a month and a half. You know, if you really think about it, now that we're actually going back and reviewing these retro Raws in real time, the build to the Bret Owen cage match at SummerSlam, it kind of sucks. It's barely been acknowledged on TV. The cage stipulation, I don't even think the announcers have really put over the significance of why or how this even became a cage match, period. Again, Bret is rarely on the show anyway. The whole thing's taken a backseat with all the stuff going on with Taker and Luger and DiBiase and that whole charade. It's kind of a messy situation. Meanwhile, we look back at the cage match with fond memories because it was an instant classic. Little do we remember just how subpar the build actually was on television. You know what else I didn't remember? Abe Knuckleball Schwartz. Yeah. Because, well, that was a rather timely event in the year 1994. The Major League Baseball strike. Something I had no idea about at the time because I was not a baseball fanatic. I don't even know if Vince was a baseball fan, to be honest with you, but he certainly wasn't going to back down to the opportunity to mock it. So he took Steve Lombardi, aka the Brooklyn Brawler, and he said, "I've got it. We're going to paint your face to look like a baseball. We're going to put you in a sports jersey. And then we're going to have you protest in the crowd with picket signs. And then cut promos on all the ungrateful fans that don't appreciate what the baseball owners are doing. That's such good shit." Sure was. It was such good shit that the gimmick died a horrid death in the span of about 2 minutes. Yet somehow, this gimmick ended up being around longer than, well, a lot of bad ideas that Vince came up with in the mid-90s. Yeah, this one stuck around. And then it was dropped randomly with no explanation, and then Steve Lombardi went back to being the Brooklyn Brawler. And that's the story of Abel Knuckleball Schwartz's run in the World Wrestling Federation. It was the 90s. What are you going to do? And that putrid gimmick was immediately followed with another putrid gimmick that never got over in the WWF. Duke the Dumpster Droese. Putrid. In every sense of the word. He squashed Nick Barbary in about 90 seconds and won with a corkscrew elbow. And unlike the Abe Schwartz gimmick that was only around for about 4 or 5 months before being unceremoniously dropped, the Duke the Dumpster thing went on for seemingly 50 years. It was more like 3. But that was 3 years too many. More Leslie Nielsen sketches. On his quest to identify the truth about the decoy Undertaker. He's making a lot of progress in his journey to uncover the mystery. Apparently that search involves lounging at pools and reading dirt sheet magazines. Ted DiBiase's not giving him much faith. Did I mention this storyline fucking sucks? Not sure if that ever came up in passing, but yeah. The Undertaker versus Undertaker saga, not a fan. Not at all. As a forever mark of The Undertaker, I can confidently say The Undertaker versus Bryan Lee SummerSlam storyline, no good. Bad. Very, very bad. You know what else was very bad? Quang versus Tony Roy. This segment also sucked. And here's the thing. I literally looked away for 3 seconds to type something up in my notes. When I looked back at the screen, Quang already won. I have no idea how. And quite frankly, I didn't care enough to go back and check. Why? Because it's Quang. Need I say any more? Poor Savio. And then we had the King's Court. For the record, 15 minutes had gone by since the opener with Owen and the 1-2-3 Kid. And we finally got something on the show worth paying attention to. Not to say the segment was any good. It really wasn't. But at least there was some shit to talk about here. Of course, it's Lawler and DiBiase out there reprimanding Paul Bearer, saying that DiBiase's the one that brought The Undertaker into the WWF. Meanwhile, this Paul Bearer has provided zero evidence that he actually has the real Undertaker. So now we're going to get to hear Paul's side of the story. And, well, without me completely destroying my vocal cords, here's the extent of Paul's message to DiBiase and his so-called Undertaker. Oh, yes. I've seen real evil in this world, Mr. DiBiase. You spent a long time trying to tarnish the legacy of The Undertaker. So I'm here to let you know that at SummerSlam, my Undertaker will destroy your Undertaker. Which, of course, prompts Ted to let Paul know that if he has a message to deliver to The Undertaker, he can say it to his face. I believe his actual setup was, quote, the one, the only, The Undertaker. Not just Undertaker, but The Undertaker. So, of course, out comes Ted's imposter, and, well, Brian did some hocus-pocus playing with the lighting effects. The wax-on, wax-off, if you will. Paul looks at him and says that he sees evil in his eyes too, but at SummerSlam, those evil eyes will be forever shut because Paul's Undertaker, the true Undertaker, will destroy him. So Ted tells the Underfaker to let Paul know what's really going to go down at SummerSlam, at which point he grabs a hold of Bear by the throat and proceeds to choke him. And while Paul's fading and starting to slowly lose consciousness, well, the lights begin flickering, and we hear the sound of Undertaker's gong, at which point the entire building completely blacks out, as Vince McMahon begins to obnoxiously talk over the scene for an entire 2 minutes, without stopping. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there at my couch, screaming to the top of my lungs, Vince, shut the fuck up. But he just kept talking. And, well, eventually we get the purple lighting effect, and Paul Bear is now magically on the floor, doing what I can merely best describe as the Paul Bear selling. In only the way that Percy Pringle knew how, he reaches his hands into the air and shouts, "Can you feel it? Oh, is here. And, well, I was certainly feeling something after this was all over. But it is moments like this where I'm reminded, as wacky as the Undertaker gimmick was, the fact that this man was able to make an entire career out of it and never lose his mystique, it is one of the most baffling things about the wrestling business. Really, think about it. A gimmick that should have had a very short shelf life. Something that, honestly, should have never gotten over to begin with. A gimmick that should have come and gone in the annals of wrestling history, alongside with every other hokey gimmick we saw in the WWF during this period. It's this one that outlasted everything else. Even as a kid. Like, whenever I would see this shit happen in real time, I can't even explain it. It was like a trance. I couldn't look away. I was so captivated by everything this guy did. The spookiness and mesmerizing performance of Taker, Paul Bearer being such a personality, everyone always selling it perfectly with either showing fear or trepidation whenever the lights would go out. You know, or if Taker would just magically appear in the ring and it would freak the shit out of everybody. God, it was so amazing. If only this storyline didn't suck a cock. Speaking of things that sucked cocks. Actually, I need to be careful with how I phrase that. The gimmick. Not the actual talent work in the gimmick. But, yeah, this Mabel squash with Ray Raymond. It was pretty horrendous. What I was mainly focused on during this 2-minute match was the announcement, in passing, from Vincent Savage. The match scheduled for SummerSlam is Mabel versus Jeff Jarrett? The fuck? Where did that random drawing come from? Has Jeff Jarrett ever interacted with Mabel in any previous segment on this program? Have they even been in the same room together? God, you want to talk about me being out to lunch with a lot of prelim matches at SummerSlam 94? Mabel versus Jeff Jarrett? Whew. Yeah, I have no memories of that match ever happening. Are we sure that actually took place? And didn't get cut? I might need to check the wiki page and see if that's a thing. I'm not going to do it now because I want to get through this report. But, yeah, that one's kind of out of left field. Speaking of Double J, he was out there to wrestle in the main event this week. His squash was against Scott Taylor. This might have been the most ridiculous Jeff Jarrett getup I've seen yet. I always laugh about the choice of ring gear these guys come up with at times. The ones that have absolutely no taste in style. Or even basic fucking color coordination. Double J said to himself, I need a color pattern for my strap singlet gear. I got it. I'll go with orange and fire crimson red. Whew. A clash of colors if I've ever seen it. Anyway, Jeff won with the figure 4 in about a minute, which immediately led to Mabel and Oscar coming out, so Oscar could rap and cut a promo on Double J. Meanwhile, in one of the more noteworthy moments of Jeff's career, while he's out there in that ridiculous getup, he's making chicken signs and Mabel on the floor because referees are trying to hold Mabel back. And, well, it would seem the story for this Mabel Jarrett match is differences in musical philosophy. That's why they're mad. Because Jeff likes country music and Mabel likes hip-hop. And I guess Jeff is not an advocate of the hip-hop music industry. Jeff's supposed to be the heel, right? Just checking. I mean, it's kind of hard for me to disagree. Although it is easier to listen to than rap. They're very similar, but hip-hop is tolerable by comparison. Now, the stuff we're seeing here with Oscar and Mabel, I mean, that's about as white as you can get, because it's under the WWF umbrella circa 1994. But that was their main event for Raw this week. A worthless television show in just about every sense of the word. Peaking with Owen and the 1-2-3 Kid in the opener, and then very quickly fizzling out afterwards with a bunch of meaningless squashes and, God, the fucking dirt worst of all the gimmicks they had going on. Abe Knuckleball Schwartz, Duke the Dumpster Drozy, Quang, Imposter Taker. God, this shit was awful. One of the worst Raws we've recapped since last week. Now, there was that really one bad show where they main evented Adam Bomb. That was beyond rotten. But, God, we're like 2 weeks out from this SummerSlam pay-per-view. The hype for it's been quite terrible. Now we've added Mabel and Jeff to the card. Yeah. Because I was going to boost last-minute buys. God help us all. Well then. That took a shocking left turn at the end there. Was not expecting that. And here's the funny thing. I hadn't even watched SmackDown yet before I saw all the news boards and podcasters popping up with their SmackDown reports. And like every single title was the exact same thing. Jey Uso quits. And quits is in all caps. And I was like, wait, what? Well, that's not part of the next chapter in the Bloodline story I was expecting. Jey just walking out. That's different. But, well, leave it to early spoilers to actually be a good thing. Because it got me wanting to actually see what the fuck was going on here and what Jey actually said. Like, did he just walk out to the ring and say, "Yeah, fuck it, I'm done"? What was the motive that led to this decision? Aside from losing to Roman at SummerSlam. Did he wake up and realize that his main event push was no longer going to be a thing? Did the reality catch up to him that he wasn't going to be the guy? So instead of taking the high road and going back to being mid-card Jey Uso, he took the political route and said, "Nah, that doesn't work for me, brother. You want me to do the job to Roman? I will. But fuck you. I'm out here afterwards. Rip up my contract." If only. Now that is Jey Uso playing chess when everybody else in the company is playing checkers. What a move. Now, of course, it was a little more thought out than that. Although I kind of like my idea better after what I saw. The idea of Jey Uso shooting and trying to go into business for himself. That actually would have been a great swerve in the Bloodline story. Then we find out Jey Uso was secretly in cahoots with Roman the whole time. The whole thing was a ploy from the very beginning. God, wouldn't that be amazing? Samoan politics. Roman being originally scheduled to drop the strap to Jey, but then at the last minute he pulls the Hulk Hogan card and says, "Nah, that doesn't work for me, brother." And Jey goes, fuck you, dude. I'm the right-hand man. The powers that be told me that I'm going over at SummerSlam and I'm going to be the new head of the table. The new tribal chief. Oh, man. The layers of content they could dive into. They could devote an entire season of Dark Side of the Ring to the Bloodline story. Where the Bloodline went wrong. The summer of 2023. The night Roman went into business for himself. God, I'm a genius. I love speculating on shit that's entirely possible just to troll people. And like I said, it was entirely more interesting than Jay's explanation for quitting. So we had some turnover here on commentary. I don't even remember if I mentioned this on the SummerSlam recap, but yeah. For literally no reason, they just decided to swap announce teams. They took the Raw crew and moved them over to SmackDown and vice versa. Literally for no reason at all. What I believe they coined a roster shakeup. Despite, the fact that they have an annual draft. So there's literally no purpose in doing a roster shakeup because it entirely defeats the purpose of even having a draft. Not that the draft means anything. God, how long did it take? 2 weeks before SmackDown guys were showing up on Raw and the other way around? I mean, it doesn't matter. I'm aware of that. But here's the catch. They also kept Michael Cole. So not only do we have 2 new additions to the commentary booth, but now we're going back to that fucking dumbass 3-man commentary team, which has never worked. It's always sucked. And there's never been a 3-man booth in the history of professional wrestling where it's worked. So naturally, they're reverting back to it again. And, well, this is how long it's been since I've watched Raw. I know Corey Graves was the color guy over there. This other guy, Kevin Patrick. No idea where they found this dude. This Ken doll looking weirdo. Whew. Saw a few pictures of him on Google Images while I was browsing. Just to try to see what the guy looked like. Ugh. He looks like someone you want to keep your children away from. And what the fuck is with the weird accents in wrestling? There's that chick they hired on AEW that was part of QT Marshall's faction. I spent months trying to figure out what her accent was supposed to be. I can never figure it out. This Kevin Patrick dude bounces back and forth between an American accent, an Irish accent, and I don't even know, something resembling a New Zealand accent? Why does everyone have to have thick-ass accents where it's impossible to understand half their dialogue? And if anyone gives me the diversity hiring argument, please go fuck yourself. For the record, this is what I was mostly paying attention to during the entire Charlotte Flair-Asuka match. Was figuring out who Kevin Patrick was and what kind of accent he was supposed to have. It was highly more interesting than watching 2 of the 3 participants in that garbage-ass 3-way at the pay-per-view work yet another match. Especially when Charlotte's involved. Watching her fuck up everything under the sun. The whole thing only went like 8 minutes. A lot of which happened during the commercial. So there's not even a whole lot to talk about. And the finish is Damage Control waltzing down to the ring. Also, Io can wind up hitting Asuka and Charlotte with stereo missile drop kicks. And that was it. I guess it was ruled a no contest. Your guess is as good as mine. I don't know what the point of it was. To apparently remind everybody that Io won the title. Okay. Fine. And you needed to waste our time with an 8-minute TV match to prove that point. Why? Beats me. So from that point in the show, up until the start of the next match with AJ Styles and Karrion Kross, about 12 minutes of nothing had gone by. And I'm not even joking. We had a long video package for the Roman J match, followed by an Austin Theory Santos Escobar video package, followed by a backstage angle where Theory attacked Escobar and slammed a trunk door on his leg, followed by another long-ass video package for the AJ Cross feud, followed by doctors icing Escobar in the trainer's room, and then we finally get the match, and they wrestle for approximately 2 minutes. AJ tried to give Cross a penalty kick off the apron, but Cross grabbed him and gave him a DVD onto the announce table. And then they immediately go to commercial. Great. So well over 10 minutes had gone by where nothing of substance had happened, minus a brief injury angle with Santos Escobar. And from that point to the start of the next match, it's 2 more minutes of action and then an immediate cut to commercial. Pfft. No wonder people fast forward through half this shit. How can't you? Nothing ever happens on this show. It's 30 minutes of action in a 2-hour window, surrounded by nothing but commercial breaks and video packages. So they come back and do some more stuff for a while. There was a really bad sequence where both guys mistimed a reverse DDT spot out of the corner. Both guys just kind of fell down. Then they tried to save it with something afterwards, and they both fell down again. God, that looked horrible. And I don't even know what they were trying to do. Both guys were just totally out to lunch. AJ hit a 450 splash for a visual 3, but Scarlett put Cross's foot on the bottom rope. That led to a really awkward exchange on the floor with the girls, where Mia Yim tried to go after Scarlett, but Scarlett just kind of sidestepped her and then punched her with a right hand. I actually wrote down here, boy, Mia Yim looked like a fucking dweeb. And, well, basically what happened was, Mia threw Scarlett over the announce desk, and then AJ took over on Cross, hit him with a Styles Clash, and then pinned him clean. The finish was okay. The rest of the match was just kind of eh. You know, it's funny. The announcers were talking about how this is a feud that's been going on for a long time. Can anybody even recall what the issue was with these guys? Why they started feuding to begin with? What exactly was the story here? Cross's entire WWE run since he came back was drawing random Joker cards out of a hat and then feuding with whatever name he happened to pull out. There's no consistency to anything he does. It's feud with a guy, cut a nonsensical promo, do the job. Feud with another guy, cut more nonsensical promos, do another fucking job. I mean, I was calling it the Bray Wyatt booking for a reason. It's the same shit they pulled with him for years on the main roster. This feud never clicked with me to begin with. I'm just glad it's hopefully over. Of course, that's me assuming things, considering they put the babyface over clean. Not that that really means anything in modern wrestling anymore. It should signify the end of the program. But who knows? So the next thing that happened was Edge coming down for, I guess, a surprise appearance. The Calgary crowd was sure fired up to see him. And he begins making his entrance. And you'll never guess what happened. No, seriously. Go ahead. Take a wild guess. That's right. They went to break. And I literally had just walked back into the room, too. There was a Cody Brock package going on right after the AJ Cross match. I was like, now would be a good time to heat up my coffee before anything else happens. And I come back in the room. I see Edge making his entrance. Goes on for like 15 seconds. Immediate cut to commercial. I was so pissed. So they come back and Edge is doing the white meat babyface deal. Cheap pops. That kind of thing. He's plugging the 25th year anniversary next week in Toronto. But when he noticed that Calgary was on the docket in the week prior for their travel schedule, he wanted to take the opportunity to see everybody in person to make the special announcement he had. Next week in Toronto, Edge's hometown, he's going to be having a match against Sheamus. Two guys that have never crossed paths in singles action, despite being under the same roof in WWE for several years. Which I never really thought about before, but that is weird to think about. I'm not too up to snuff with my 2010s era of WWE television. I was kind of on and off during that period, but I'll take Edge's word for it. I don't ever recall seeing those guys wrestle each other. I know they were both around together for a few years when Sheamus was new to the company, but yeah. I'm drawing a blank on a time I ever saw those guys actually touch. Could be revisionist history on WWE's part, but I don't think Edge would lie about something like that. I don't really think he has a reason to. But this is really cool. You know, Edge is out there talking about Sheamus's YouTube channel. They did a mountain bike challenge a few years ago. It was right around the point Edge was about to make his return to the Royal Rumble in 2020. And that video is actually on YouTube. They showed a little bit of the snippet here, but people want to see the whole thing. You can actually go to his YouTube channel and check it out. I've seen a few of those Celtic Warrior workout segments with Sheamus, and it's actually kind of a cool concept. Like him bringing on some of the other guys to show them their workout routines, showing Sheamus how to try different exercises. It's usually like gym and weight training based stuff, but you know, occasionally you get those mountain bike segments like the one he did with Edge. But the story here is after Edge wiped out on the trail and got back up, he realized that he's physically capable of wrestling again. It's just a matter of getting the crap kicked out of him a few times to see if his body can still hold up. And he talks about how he owes a lot to Sheamus for lighting a fire under him and helping him to gain his confidence back. So out comes Sheamus, because Edge kind of needs an answer for the challenge next week. And of course, the things friends like to do is rib each other, right? You know, so Sheamus is pulling up the footage of Edge wiping out on the trail. And it's one of those real eye-opening, inspirational moments for Edge in particular, because he watches that footage back and he realizes, man, that was a wicked fall I took. But I bounced up, barely felt a thing. I actually kind of got a little bit of an adrenaline rush out of it. Yeah, there's some bruising on my arm. But I'm still physically capable of going. And of course, Sheamus also made sure to show the footage of the big red bump on Edge's ass, just for an extra good laugh. And they're out there jaw-jacking, busting each other's balls, trying to have a good time. And well, then we get Sheamus' side of the story, where he talks about how he was at a crossroads in his life years ago. He was trying to figure out whether or not he really wanted to pursue wrestling as a career. And he was at a live event in Ireland sometime in like 2004 or 2005. And he was going around trying to talk with some of the boys. And everybody gave him the cold shoulder except Edge. Just wanted some advice. Just wanted to pick his brain and figure out if he was cut out for the business or not. So Edge, and being a stand-up guy, did what every Irishman appreciates as a pastime. Edge bought him a beer. And they talked. And they hit it off. And they've apparently been best friends ever since. Or at least very good friends. I'm trying to think. How old would Sheamus have been in the mid-2000s? Was he legal enough to drink at that time? I'm not sure what legal age for drinking in Ireland is. Probably 7. But, yeah, that was a little strange. I mean, I know Sheamus isn't super young, but he couldn't have been any older than, 18, 19 in 2004, right? Maybe he's older than that. Probably early 20s if I had to guess, so... Yeah, he probably was old enough to legally drink. Anyway, so they agreed to the Donnybrook. Next week in Toronto, it's Edge versus Sheamus one-on-one for the first time in WWE. Which I'm sure will pop a number for them. I'm not exactly sure what to expect there. It's modern wrestling, so my hindbrain is telling me that Sheamus is going to turn heel. Which, well, you know, if they're actually trying to make something out of this, aside from a one-and-done blow-off, might not be a bad idea. I wouldn't be opposed to it. Again, it's obvious these guys are really close friends. Now that we kind of know their backstory together, if you wanted to toe that line a little bit for story purposes and run with some kind of blood feud between them, that could be something you'd be able to pay off at the next Premium Live special in September. I'm kind of suspicious they would just do this as a one-off babyface match, and that'd be the end of it. I mean, I think there's something there between these guys that would kind of lend itself to a full-fledged program. Or, you know, if you want to get Edge a little more involved, you could always go the tag team direction. I mean, the Brawling Brutes isn't really a faction that I clamor to see anymore, I'll be honest with you. Butch and Ridge Holland, they're kind of just background flunkies at this point. I didn't even really know about the Edge-Sheamus friendship. So, now that I kind of see these guys interact together, there might be something there. I mean, WWE's tag division sucks to begin with. They really don't have any top teams. But seeing these guys do business together, it's a little more promising for the tag division. They could be the top babyface team. Or, if you need a decent set of top heels, you could always flip them. These guys are ring veterans. They've been around the block. They know what they're doing. Sammy and KO, I think they're still the tag champions. I'm just spitballing ideas. Give them more options in the fucking Pretty Deadly crew. But, I'm intrigued. Only took until the top of the hour for them to get something interesting on the show, but it was quite the payoff. So after that came an LA Knight versus Flop Dollar match, where the announcers were outright bearing the idea of Floppy ever derailing the Yab movement. You'll be shocked to hear he didn't. LA Knight won with the BFT in about a minute, and then he got on the stick, did some of his catchphrases. The people popped. And that was WWE's follow-up to one of their hottest stars in the company right now. After winning the Slim Jim Battle Royal at SummerSlam. One of the hottest baby faces in the company. That was their follow-up. A 60-second squash with Uncle Phil and a 20-second promo where he said yeah a million times. I mean, it was fine, but is it fair to say I was expecting more? Apparently they shot an angle with him and Miz on Raw. Good Lord, I hope they have something a little more thought out than LA Knight feuding with the fucking Miz. But meanwhile on SmackDown, he's beating up Shit Row. It's, again, fine for what it is, but it's not really doing much to elevate the profile of LA Knight right now. Everybody knows that group sucks. Having LA Knight beat them up every week is only going to get him so far. Unless the payoff is him making out with BFAP. Hey, you know what would have been a better option? Having him beat Theory for the US title. There's an idea. That's so crazy it just might get over. No. Here's what they did instead. We were supposed to get Theory versus Escobar for the US title, but Theory attacked Escobar in the aisleway again and chop blocked his knee. And that was apparently all the further damage it took to take Escobar out of the match entirely. A chop block. And that was it. Escobar was done. So naturally, as what tends to happen on WWE TV a lot of the time, what's the backup option? Impromptu matches. Theory's out there joking about how no one's going to get to see him defend his belt tonight because Escobar is too weak and too frail. So here comes Plan B. Rey Mysterio. And it's now officially sanctioned by, I guess, Adam Pearce. Hard to tell a lot of the time because so much of the roster holds his feet over the fire with booking their own matches and calling their own shots. I think he's still the general manager. But it's now Rey versus Theory for the title. That is, after the commercial break, less than a minute into the pre-match brawl. The timing of commercial breaks on this show. Impeccable. So we come back for the match. They go about 2 minutes. Rey catches Theory with a 619 to the back. Theory tries to hoist up Rey for the A-Town down, but the back gives out on him. So Rey drop kicks Theory into the ropes. 619 the second time. Big splash. Cover. 1, 2, 3. And just like that, Rey Mysterio is now the new United States champion. Which was kind of a roundabout way of crowning a new champion, if I'm being honest. With the whole convoluted tournament they set up to get to this point. The weird finish to that Escobar-Mysterio match the other week where Escobar basically won via forfeit because Rey hit the back of his head on the rampway and they had to stop the match. Now they shoot an angle with Escobar getting his leg targeted so they can wind up taking him out of the match. Then we get an impromptu Rey versus Theory match. And that's how they end up swapping the belt over. So at the end of the day, I guess the goal was to always put the belt on Rey then, right? I think people were figuring Escobar was going to be the guy they were trying to elevate out of the whole story. I always thought that was rather suspect. Escobar, to me, always served better as a heel. The stuff he did in NXT as a bad guy was always more preferable to this white meat lucha babyface crap he's been doing on the main roster. Now that I'm seeing what they did here, I actually wouldn't be shocked to see if they end up turning him on Rey. Now that they got the belt off Theory, now there's something they can actually do with Rey and Escobar in a meaningful title program. I mean, let's be frank, I'm an Austin Theory fan, but they weren't doing jack shit with him as the champion anyway. At least if you got the LWO teasing dissension, that's a program people can actually get invested with. Maybe you have the two lackeys side with Escobar, and they all turn on Rey. Again, it's something. Other than keeping the belt on Austin Theory for pretty much no reason. So I'm actually okay with this decision. Roll with the punches and see where it takes you. Why not? And then we had the main event segment. It is Friday Night SmackDown after all. Sponsored by the Bloodline. The only thing of real substance on WWE television anymore. Even if the SummerSlam payoff left a lot to be desired. And I already alluded to this at the top of the report, but before we talk about the Jey stuff, let's go over all the other material here in this 20-minute story arc. Good Lord. 10 of which was Roman's entrance, by the way. And the other 5 with Roman, Solo, and Heyman just standing in there in complete silence. So we start with Roman asking Wise Man where the fuck Jimmy is. Because he did not come down to the ring with the group. And well, then he showed up. He just sort of meandered through the crowd in a jet black hoodie. I guess to give off the illusion that he's playing the neutral party. Because then he gets in the ring, and Roman's telling him that he owes him one. So he can name the price, whatever he wants. Jimmy's earned it. Money, power, yachts, jets, trains, rocket ships. But, actually, Jimmy's here to tell Roman that what happened at SummerSlam was not a way of helping Roman. He actually did it for himself. And while Roman's trying to figure out what the heck's going on here, who should come out to interrupt but Jey? And well, actually, I'm going to go ahead and skip to the main talking point here. The reason behind Jimmy costing Jey the title at SummerSlam. We've been waiting for 5 days to hear this explanation. God, and after the fallout to SummerSlam, it better have been a damn good explanation at that. So here it is. The reason Jimmy screwed Jey is because he did not want Jey to turn into the tribal chief. He didn't want his brother to become a, quote, manipulative, lying asshole. Which I'm surprised Fox didn't bleep out. I didn't think you could say asshole on TV. But they just left that one right in. Of course, I thought you couldn't say fuck either, but I hear that virtually every week on AEW. No one ever gets punished for it. But, yes, that was the rationale. Jimmy was afraid. He was scared that Jey would end up becoming one of them. Yeah. Gonna be blunt. Not a satisfying explanation. And in fact, it all but confirms my worst suspicions that the Jimmy Uso swerve at the pay-per-view was a last-minute decision that did not have much forethought put into it. Because the explanation was very subpar. Mid, at best. So Jimmy tells Jey that the ball's in his court now. He did what he did. So he's going to let Jey return the favor as he needs to. If he needs to kick him in the face to get his revenge, then so be it. By the way, the best part in this segment, I have to talk about this. Because while this is going on, while Jimmy's leaving himself exposed for Jey to super kick the shit out of him, the crowd's chanting, "No, don't do it!" Jey's pacing back and forth, contemplating it. And meanwhile, in the background, there's fucking Roman with that smug look under his breath going, "Do it. Yeah, do it." I laughed so hard. Roman's performance here was outstanding. He's so great at the subtle reactions to everything. Oh, Jimmy and Jey are hot at each other, going back and forth, arguing. There's Roman back there in the corner, just laughing, hands crossed, just basking in the chaos he's caused. Such great heel work. Well, basically what happened was, Jimmy left. Jey was standing there with his back turned momentarily. And while Roman's running his mouth again, calling Jey Uso stupid and selfish, just raking him over the coals, finally Jey snaps, and he lays out Roman and Solo with super kicks. I wrote down, all of a sudden it's Stone Cold Jey Uso, because he's just out there laying waste to everybody and totally not giving a fuck. And then we get this awesome moment. And I don't know if this was supposed to be comedy, but goddamn, I laughed so hard at this. As Jey calls Jimmy back down the aisleway. Keep in mind, this is important. While Jey's out there beating up the top champion and his muscle 2-on-1 with no problem, Jimmy's just kind of slowly edging toward the back, not lifting a finger to help. His back's turned the entire time. So Jey goes out to the floor and he calls Jimmy back down. He's like, "Brother, come on, come down here for a minute." And it looks like they're about to make up. They're about to hug it out. And then it's Jey Uso with the ultimate swerve as he goes, "Fuck you, brother." And he decks Jimmy with a wicked super kick. Kills this guy. I cannot tell you how hard I laughed. It was so wonderful. What a dork Jimmy Uso turned out to be. And that is when I officially declared him Stone Cold Jey Uso. No longer main event Jey Uso. But now he's literally just a carbon copy of Steve Austin. Really. He's unhinged. He's off his rocker. He is completely snapped. Really, at this point, the only thing left for him to do is super kick Vince McMahon the next time we see him on television. Which will probably only happen in virtual reality. WWE 2K23. Jey Uso super kicking Vince McMahon. I'm sure someone will come up with it. They'll launch the Attitude Era 2.0. But, well, this is the crux of the matter. What people have been discussing over the last couple days now. As Jimmy then looks into the camera with all three core members of the bloodline laid out. And Jey says, "I'm done. I'm done with the Bloodline. I'm done with the Usos. I'm done with SmackDown. I'm done with WWE. And then he walked out through the crowd. He high-fived some fans. And that was how the show went off air. Huh. That was weird. I don't really know what to make of all that. But just to recap real briefly, to make sure we're all on the same page with this, the reason Jimmy fucked Jey was because he didn't want Jey to become another version of Roman Reigns. And the explanation was so piss poor and so groundless that Jey Uso said, well, fuck you then too, brother. And he laid out the entire bloodline in one segment and then walked out of the company in kayfabe. Something's telling me this wasn't thought through very well. Call it a hunch. Call me a skeptic. But, I'm thinking there were a few details that were glossed over along the way. Perhaps. Tell you who came out the worst out of everybody involved was Jimmy. What an idiot. Not only was his explanation for screwing Jey horrible, but he ended up getting his ass laid out at the end of the night anyway. Didn't do anything to get his heat back from the SummerSlam fallout. Didn't do anything to really establish where he falls on the bloodline train. Is he on the fence? Is he part of the group? Is he still unsure? And see, this is why I was skeptical about the decision of actually going through with the Roman Jey title match to begin with. Not that they were evidently going to screw up the bloodline story, but the fact that there really wasn't a great booking conclusion to the match, unless the end result was putting the strap on Jey, which was never in the cards. I mean, the Jimmy swerve was just dumb. I stand by that. That didn't make a lick of sense. But even with Jey coming out here and basically quitting, what was that all about? Is the idea that he's completely snapped and now he's just going to run roughshod everywhere and super kick the shit out of everybody? That'll get old fast. I could see him being the ultimate deciding factor in helping to get the belt on Cody Rhodes in Mania next year. Somehow being the ultimate difference maker and costing Roman. That could work. But we're like, what, 6 to 7 months away from that ever happening? And I really don't think they can carry that momentum forward for that long. We've already reached a breaking point with the bloodline thing where it's kind of run its course. Now it's just being dragged out for the sake of it. What I want to know is how all this ties into the next premium live special. Payback, I think it's called. What's the bloodline involvement going to be on that show? Jey just walked out. So unless him quitting WWE consists of him quitting for all of 2 or 3 weeks, well, that's going to mean absolutely nothing. And then it's what? Jimmy versus Jey? Does anybody really want to see that? I don't know if that really screams pay-per-view caliber match. I mean, I'll give him points for trying to course correct a little bit, but I'm still a little uneasy about this. I'm not sure if this is the direction they should be taking this stuff. They're sort of veering off the interstate right now, and they're not doing a great job in getting things back on track again. And I've talked about it before with the whole Bloodline story. Eventually, it's going to hit a wall where something's going to have to happen to give the Bloodline some kind of valuable payoff. They've been dragging it out for, 3 years now? The end goal is to get the belt off Roman, and that's got to be the final chapter. But we're still months away from that feasibly happening. And I got to be honest, this is probably the first time in a long time where I'm kind of worried about the direction they're taking everything. I didn't hate this segment. I hated Jimmy's explanation for costing Jey the match because that still made no fucking sense. But the whole Jey thing, it's odd. And I think that's kind of just where I have to leave it for right now until I see what they do next. But we're in a very odd, strange period right now with the Bloodline story. And there's part of me that's intrigued to see where they take it, but at the same time, it's more of like an anxious waiting instead of an eager waiting. And if you don't know the difference between anxious and eager, just go look it up in the dictionary. There's a positive connotation and a negative connotation, and anxious leans more like the apprehensive direction, where you are kind of skeptical about where it's going. That's where I am. But maybe I'm the only one. What do you say we turn things over to AEW and see what they fed us over the weekend? They've been running a bit hot and cold lately. The last couple shows have started to trail in terms of quality. And yeah, I know last weekend they had the SummerSlam obstacle thrown at them. Competition was high, and it definitely reflected in the ratings. But even with a show like Collision, it is such a stark contrast to the Wednesday shows, and it's not even close. There's more organization with this program. They actually try to hook you in with things from the very beginning so you're not left with any surprises. You know what's going to be on the show. They're telling you why shit matters. Even if I personally wasn't all that enthused about CM Punk and FTR versus the House of Drek, at least they're attempting to fill me in with why I should stay tuned in to watch it. And I did. Against my better judgment. No, I'm just kidding. But even so, beyond Punk and FTR, you still got plenty of underneath and middle card action that usually keeps me hooked. As always, there's going to be ebbs and flows with everything I see. But I don't go into this show with an overwhelming feeling of dread. You know, I at least know that things are going to be handled professionally. They got their top of the card programs, they got their main draws, and they got stuff underneath to where I'm willing to watch most of it and see where it all goes, even if I may be a tad critical with how they're going about a few things. But we're starting off hot this week with Ricky Starks. That's not a bad way to kick off the show. He's coming off the loss to CM Punk last week. They've sort of hit the reset button with the Punk and Joe feud. But at the same time, they don't want to entirely push Ricky to the back burner. He did just come off beating Punk in the finals of the Owen Hart Cup. So he still needs to be factored in and treated as an upper mid-card or main event guy. And I thought they laid out the groundwork perfectly here. Tony Schiavone updated the people that because of Ricky's actions last week after the match, him whipping Steamboat with a leather belt, he's been suspended from in-ring competition for 30 days. Not suspended from appearing at any show, but suspended from wrestling, which is, okay. Kind of odd. I'd have maybe added a fine or something. just to rub in the repercussions a bit more. But who can play at those devious mind games? Because Ricky went ahead and got himself a manager's license. So even though he's suspended from wrestling, they can't bar him from the building. So Ricky promises that he's about to unleash hell on the entire AEW roster starting next week. Which I kind of chuckled at. I'm so mad. I'm going to beat the living hell out of anybody that gets in my way. But I'm going to hold off until next week because reasons. And I did find it a little strange how his way of ensuring that he stays on TV is by going out of his way to get a manager's license. So obviously that begs the question, okay, who's he going to manage? But I liked what they did here. Ricky's fired up, he's pissed off, he's unhinged, he's out for blood, and he basically established that he's not through with CM Punk yet. The war is not over. It will never be over. And that makes sense because technically their series is tied at 1 apiece. Naturally, you would expect them to do some kind of rubber match. But at the same time, this opened up some new doors for Ricky to explore. Even though he lost last week, they're not derailing his momentum. Now he's turning his attention to other matters and vowing to beat the crap out of anybody that tries to fuck with him. And he's so believable with selling the anger, you actually buy it. Didn't come off stagey or impractical. Very good start to the show. I guess the only thing I'm still wondering about, and again, maybe this is just nitpicky, but since winning the Owen Hart tournament, not only has Ricky not come out with the trophy, but he's barely acknowledged it on TV. The tournament has been a complete afterthought in the fallout. And I'm wondering if they're missing the boat on an opportunity for Ricky to maybe gloat about being the Owen Hart Cup winner. Why is he not hamming that up? Have him sport the trophy every week. Have him sort of emulate the spoiled, bratish nature of Owen Hart's heel gimmick. Kind of like the heel run from 1994 we're talking about right now with the Retro Raw recaps. The King of Hearts gimmick. The jealous, cocky prick brother. I mean, Ricky's such a natural at being a villain. Why not embrace more of the Owen heel work? Just some food for thought. You know, instead of totally neglecting the tournament outright and moving forward like it never happened. Because that's what happened after Adam Cole and Britt Baker won the Owen Hart tournaments last year. They had that one moment together on stage with Martha presenting them with the cups and the pink belts, and that was basically it. There was no follow-up. Cole and Baker never came out on television with custom belts or the trophies ever again. It was just totally glossed over. I mean, I'm hoping they don't do that with Ricky because he is the kind of guy that could take a moment like that and run with it. So the first official TV match this week was the Acclaimed versus... Oh, shoot, what'd they call them? The Iron Savages? That's what I wrote down. I forget what they used to call these guys. Bronson and Boulder were their names, I think. They were the two big meaty-looking guys that were green as goose shit, but had a decent old-school look to them. Probably could have done something with them if AEW had a proper developmental training program. So anyway, Bowens and Caster came out without Billy Gunn. Sad little moment during the ring intros where Bowens subconsciously tried to do the scissor me daddy ass shtick, but then realizing that Billy wasn't there with them, he stopped, and the crowd all went, "Aww." And they had an interesting idea with this match. The Acclaimed were fighting from underneath for a lot of it because they didn't have Billy Gunn in their corner. So the story was they were off their game. Didn't really lend itself to a good TV match because all four of these guys are green. The Iron Savages being significantly greener than Bowens and Caster. So a lot of their shit looked bad. But the Acclaim made a comeback. They hit the big guys with a couple big offense moves, and then one went over with Stereo Famousers. Then they got on the stick afterwards and proclaimed that the best two-man tag team is back. And they will be wrestling on Dynamite this week, which, to me, sounds like motivation for a certain third party to maybe turn on these mofos for throwing him under the bus. The best two-man duo. Huh. I mean, even though Caster and Bowens had Billy's boots, they were still putting him over. Sounds to me like they were pretty quick to talk about being a regular tag team unit again. I don't know. We'll see what Papa Billy has to say about that. We'll also see what the Beta Bucks have to say about having to wrestle the Bullet Club Gold on Dynamite this week. I guess Jay White has some bad blood with these guys too, huh? All this time, I thought those guys were pretty tight. Apparently those days are long gone. Anyway, moving on here. We had a Willow Nightingale and Chris Statlander versus Diamante and Mercedes Martinez tag match. And I'm sure with all the drama going on in AEW's female locker room, you'd have probably thought this was going to pop a rating somehow. Just out of morbid curiosity. I really can't confirm one way or the other. All I know is that I had a lot of shit going on. I started watching the show a lot later than normal on Sunday, so I ended up fast-forwarding through this one. I think the heels won. And the only reason I say that is because I caught the tail end of the segment where Willow was leaning over Statlander on the apron going, "Cheaters! Cheaters!" So I presume the heels cheated. Did I miss anything important? No? We good? Cool. Let's move on to more important things, such as Samoa Joe killing job guys in short squash matches. Those never get old. Although they killed Joe's new gimmick. I thought they were just going to serve him up all the fake luchadors. Now, this week it was a generic-looking indie guy with long, stringy hair and a tacky singlet. No. Joe tapped him out with a coquina clutch. And then he got on the mic and, for lack of better terms, threatened to kill CM Punk for blowing him off last week. He said he gave him the common courtesy of answering Joe's challenge like a man, but instead, a week has gone by and it's been radio silent. The alleged AEW World Champion is nothing but a scared little biatch. And since Punker didn't want to answer Joe's challenge, now Joe is left with no choice but to convince him. Obviously, I am not doing that promo justice, but I did write down here, Samoa Joe is my new favorite promo in the year 2023. It just sucks how hard he's trying to be a heel. But because of the audience, there's like no way this badass Joe gimmick is going to get him heat. Like him squashing job guys in 30 seconds and then cutting scathing promos, threatening to beat people's ass. Gee, I wonder how that's going to get over. Unless they run in the other direction and have Punk be the heel, which is kind of dependent on the crowd these days. I mean, with the UK market, it's a little harder to call. There are definitely a lot of smarter fans over there. Probably more so than the American audience, for being frank. The ones that are going to be attending Wembley, I can guarantee you that's going to be mostly a hardcore fan base. So that building reaction is going to be very interesting for this Joe Punk match. I think I know who the crowd's going to be favoring. But why don't we let the room confirm the story? So then we had some Christian Cage stand-up. One of the few modern-day wrestling personalities who doesn't even have to try to be funny to be a condescending douchebag. He's just a natural comedian. And the reason it works is that, yes, while he's great in his role and knows how to trigger the fans, at the same time, what I appreciate about Christian is that he's not trying to be blatantly phony. He's not winking at the camera. He's not showing the people that he's in on the gag. He's not breaking any fourth walls. He's just being a natural personality. Shocker, the guy's been around the block a time or two, so he knows what he's doing. I just wish more people would be a heel like him. But, now he's out there getting cheap heat from the North Carolina crowd, cutting the promo on Darby and telling him that he'll never get a shot at the TNT belt as long as Christian's holding it. And while he's midway through his verbiage, who should then interrupt but Arn and Brock Anderson? I forgot all about those two. And boy howdy, I'll tell you, man, Arn Anderson, he's seen better days. He's been through a lot of ups and downs with his health over the years, but God, can that guy still cut a heck of a promo. Standing out there putting over Greensboro, talking about how this is horseman country, damn it. And he's just there to remind the sea monster that Christian Cage is currently holding a belt that does not belong to him. And Christian firing back and telling Arn that he said he wasn't going to be doing any more open challenges for his belt, but he will surely make an exception for AA if he thinks he still has it. And Arn retorts perfectly by going, well, if this were 20 years ago, I'd slide in there, lay your ass out with a spine buster, and take your belt in 10 seconds. But for now, how's about the dinosaur try Brock on for size? At which point, Arn lightly taps Brock on the ass, pitches him to go to the ring, and Brock kind of looked over his shoulder like, oh shit, that's my cue, isn't it? Timing was a little off there. And that led us to the Luchasaurus versus Brock Anderson, which was kindly put, less impressive than what Christian and Arn could have probably done in the ring together if this were 20 years prior. Holy shit, this was bad. You know, I don't want to discourage Brock. I'm sure he's a good kid. There's probably a part of him that really would like to become a household name and carry on the legacy of the Anderson family. I just don't think he's cut out for it, man. I really don't. I've seen a little bit of Brock's work in AEW. What little there is to see, considering how infrequent his booking's been. And he's a guy that's around for a while, disappears for 8 months, you don't see or hear from him, and then he just randomly pops back up again with no rhyme or reason. And he really hasn't improved any since the last time I saw him work. I mean, he still can't even hit the ropes, dude. That's a really bad sign. Can't throw a punch, can't hit the ropes, can barely even bump without looking clumsy or out to lunch. I just don't know what to say. Aside from the fact that he'd probably benefit from actually going through a real developmental system like the one WWE has, working with coaches that'll strictly focus on the basics. Because if he's ever going to get better, he needs a lot of work. And he's not getting that kind of training in AEW. He's just not. Arn can't physically coach him because his body's so beat up. You know, so without him being able to physically rough up Brock a little bit and show him what it's like to actually take bumps properly. Brock is basically relying on whatever training he can get with the current agents AEW has. And I don't even know who those guys are. Dustin? I mean, if this is the best Brock's gotten under Dustin's tutelage, yeah. Brock needs to go somewhere else and get better feedback. Because he ain't getting it here. Luchasaurus retained in a very bad match. And then Darby hit the ring and ran off the heels with a skateboard. Then he challenged Christian next week on Collision to a match. Then promised that he would beat the Dinosaur for the TNT title after the fact. I don't know if he ever clarified where that would take place, either the Wembley show or the All Out pay-per-view. But I actually wrote down here, and I'm going to acknowledge it because it's true. This was probably the best promo Darby's ever cut in AEW. Certainly one of his better ones. It's kind of amazing seeing his work on Collision versus the stuff I see him do on Dynamite. It's like two polar opposite personalities. The stuff I see Darby do on the Saturday shows, it's usually pretty good. His promos are solid. He's in there wrestling with veterans and good talent a lot of the time, so it usually tones down his worst instincts. And when Darby's not flying at the wall at 100 miles an hour, he's proven he can do good shit. It's just the issue of when he's working with his indie friends where he runs into problems. Because all those bad habits come to the forefront. And he does all that stupid reckless shit to his body for no reason. So I actually kind of prefer they keep Darby on Collision. I mean, we don't really have split rosters in AEW, but man, I just advocate they keep Darby on the Saturday shows. Gives him more opportunities to develop his microphone ability and personality, instead of needlessly falling off 20-foot ladders or landing spine first on ring aprons for no reason. So please, by all means, more stuff like this. I don't think I'll ever be sold on Darby as a worker, but at least when he's on Collision, I don't have to worry about him paralyzing himself. Anyway, so, what was next? Oh yeah, this segment. So Powerhouse Hobbs came down for a promo with Tony Schiavone, and I'll be honest, I didn't write a whole lot down about the verbiage. Something about Hobbs needing to go back to his place of darkness in order to find his most prized possession, which turned out to be the Book of Hobbs. Because that is a real thing, apparently. What I thought was a metaphysical phrase. No, turns out it's an actual part of his gimmick now. Hobbs has a physical copy of his book. Do they sell that in an AEW shop? I'd like to get a hold of it. But he's here to talk about the next chapter in his book. Redemption. He now has to redeem himself. After all the trials and tribulations he's been through. Now, of course, as soon as he said the word redeem, I immediately knew where this was going. Sure enough, out comes Miro, and he gets about halfway down the aisleway before getting jumped by the Factory, QT's group. Are they still calling themselves the Factory? I mean, it's the same cast of goons. Aaron Solo's out there. Nick Camarado's out there. I think QT was involved. Gotta be honest, I wasn't paying that close attention to it. All I know is Hobbs laid Miro out with a spine buster and then dropped the book across his chest. And, well, a couple things, actually. Number one, I don't entirely hate the idea of the feud. It's not how I would have gone about setting it up because, well, see the aforementioned names of QT Marshall and crew. It'd be better if Hobbs ditched those guys altogether and just did the program with Miro on his own. But nope, he's still trapped in this part of the story. The other thing I'm not entirely sure about is the timing of it. Miro's only been back on television for a few months, trying to basically reestablish himself again. But Hobbs is sort of on the same pathway. So is it really a wise move to be pairing these guys against each other? Because either way, someone's going to have to lose. And I'm not sure if either guy is in good enough position to lose a match and not get hurt as a result. Like Miro losing right now, being under any circumstance, would be stupid. Way too early for that. But then again with Hobbs, God, they beat this guy into powder for so long. I'd argue he shouldn't be losing any of his matches either. At least not right now. Ideally, if you spent 6 to 8 months building these guys up and kind of establishing them as polar opposite powerhouse forces, yeah, you can maybe experiment with the unstoppable force versus immovable object thing and try to draw some money off of that. The problem is that they already tried that experiment with Hobbs and Wardlow and it fucking sunk like the Titanic. Didn't do a thing for either guy because they kept trading wins back and forth and the booking was atrocious. With Miro and Hobbs, it's one of those things where I want to be excited about the feud, but what's the end game? Who comes out on the other side? I don't want to see either guy lose. That's the issue. Again, you throw QT's faction in there to muddy everything up. I don't know. I'm a little worried about this one. I mean, I'll be fair and give him a chance to develop it on TV before I completely bury it. But judging by Tony's track record of booking big guy matches, I'm not all that optimistic. And with that, our TV main event for the Trios titles, because those still exist. The House of Drek defending against CMFTR. That's CM Punk and FTR, in case that wasn't already apparent. In this match right here, this was really kind of a proving ground match for Punk and FTR. Were they capable of doing the impossible? Getting a tolerable match out of the HOD? Well, it was certainly rocking by the end. Probably the closest thing I've seen to a perfect House of Black match. And I'll even go ahead and use their Christian names and not to insult them. Their matches are usually shit. But given the right set of opponents, boy, imagine that. They're not the second coming of the Freebirds, but their matches are at least watchable. It's the only time you'll ever hear me say that Brody King worked the Bam Bam Terry Gordy role to perfection. Malachi Black's face paint looked fucking sick. And I've been a proponent of Buddy Matthews for a long time. The issue isn't the three guys individually. The issue's always been the spooky Bray Wyatt WWE-inspired production that goes behind the gimmick. All the phony arena blackouts, the nonsensical promos, all the overproduction shite. That's been my common complaint with the group from the start. That and their opponents a lot of the time, which have mostly been the elite camp members. Although I don't know if that's the story anymore, considering the fact that we don't see the House of Black on Dynamite. So there's definitely been a falling out with them and the elite of some sort. And again, I talked about this at the top. While I wasn't exactly frothing at the mouth to see this match, I was pleasantly surprised by the end. Left to their own devices, the House of Black are usually responsible for coming up with a lot of bad ideas and bad skits. as we've seen numerous times on Dynamite. But when they're out there working with pros and they're not doing all the stagey hocus pocus garbage, gee, imagine when I tell you the segments are a lot easier to watch. It's not to say this was an instant classic or anything, but I wound up enjoying it a lot more than I thought I would. I liked the face-off with Punk and Malachi. I never really put much thought into it, but that is something where you could see those guys believably working a singles program down the road and maybe even being able to do good business together. How long has it been since we've seen a Malachi Black singles match? I remember the thing with him and Cody. That didn't exactly go according to plan, but I remember Black when he was in NXT. I forget what he went by. What was his first name? It wasn't Adrian. Alistair. It was Alistair Black. Yeah, when he was in NXT as the top champion. He was one of my favorite guys in the developmental system around that point. I really liked the gimmick. And his matches were usually solid. But haven't been a big fan of the stuff he did in AEW. So why not go down that road? Punk versus Malachi. It's not a bad idea. I thought Cash in particular looked really good in this match. Dax has his off days, and no offense to the guy, I like Dax, but this was one of his weaker showings I've seen. Just didn't seem to be in the right headspace for a lot of it. A lot of miscues. He was a lot slower than he normally was. But Cash, man, that guy was hitting on all cylinders here. Especially by the end when he was running wild and making the big babyface comeback. That was a lot of fun. I think if there's one thing I can actively criticize about this match, like the one thing that I would say I did not like about it, believe it or not, it was the commercial pitch spot. And we see it so much in modern wrestling now. The 6-way face-off with all team members where they have to stand there for like 30 seconds looking at each other. And then it somehow breaks down with everybody throwing fake punches at the same time. Somehow it's cued to where everybody makes contact at the exact same time. I hate that spot the more I see of it. I wish they would cut back on that. It's so phony looking. But they had a nice heat spot where the House of Black were working over Punk, trying to weaken him. Again, people are tagging in and out. There's an actual tag match being laid out here. It's not just a 6-way romping room session with all the play kids. Brody killing Punk with that senton splash in the corner was sketchy looking. I don't know if I'd be advising Punk to take something like that. But it looked good. And of course, I talked about Cash's comeback at the end. You know, the trading back and forth with everybody hitting their big moves on each other. That got over well. And it leads to the finish, which was a good idea in theory. Not the best execution. Mainly due to the production team missing both key spots. They missed Joe grabbing Punk and pulling him over the guardrail. And they missed the finish with Brody hitting Dax with the lariat. Now, we saw them on replays, but the camera missed both of them during the initial take. That was a major goof. But that's basically what happened. Joe grabbed Punk and pulled him over the guardrail and choked him out with a coquina clutch. Meanwhile, the ref was dealing with Julia Hart, so he didn't see any of that happen. And then Brody hit Dax with a lariat and pinned him. And it was a good distraction spot. I mean, there was pretty much no way Bryce would have been able to see Joe out in the crowd given his vantage point, so at least the interference spot did not insult your intelligence. It was well played. Kind of predictable. I mean, Joe all but said, "I'm going to fuck you over in the main event, Punk." Maybe Punk should have been a little more aware of his surroundings. Not a surprise to see the champs retain. Beating FTR, I'm kind of iffy on that. it's a little close to the Wembley show to be pinning FTR right now. I mean, they're just starting to gain their momentum back with everything they've been doing. I know you had to beat somebody here, but is this one of those situations where you call an audible and say, do the DQ? Maybe you have Punk and FTR win, but the House of Black keep the belts, that sort of thing. Yeah, it's a fucked finish, but at least no one has to do a job. Again, possibly me nitpicking things. I just don't like the idea of beating FTR or Punk right now so close to a big pay-per-view event. But it was a good match. All 6 guys worked hard. It wasn't a joke. They were serious. They all worked a tag team style match. Glad to know I can actually watch a tag match on Collision and not have to point out any of the obvious shit. The basics of tag team wrestling, where the rules are constantly broken on the other channel and no one even tries to age those matches. And again, it's why, for the most part, the Collision main events have been pretty good. They're retaining the audience. They're keeping people around to watch for the entire 2 hours. Why? Well, because the main events don't insult people's intelligence. It's top guys having professionally laid out matches. It goes a long way, trust me. It really does. And overall, I thought the show was a vast improvement over last week. And the week before, for that matter. They've had a few clunkers lately, but this one seemed to follow a pattern of keeping things simple, focusing on the big players, trying to rally up the Wembley show and the all-out build. Because that pay-per-view is happening the week after the Wembley show. God, and they still got to put together a card for that event in Chicago. Which will be interesting. I haven't really put much forethought into it, but what's Punk going to be doing there? I mean, if it's Joe versus Punk at Wembley, what does that leave for him at All Out? Maybe Ricky Starks? You wrap that feud up and then set the stages for Punk and MJF? You could do that. I still think it's too early to be running with that MJF Punk program. They've still got plenty of time to rekindle that rivalry, and that's going to take a little more than 2 weeks to build up. It is still an odd choice to be doing 2 major AEW events back-to-back like that. But, they're doing enough here on the Saturday show to balance out the mayhem happening on TBS during the weeknights. So for that, I'm thankful. And with that, I think we're ready to wrap this sucker up. So make sure you all do me a favor and like the show, comment, subscribe, follow us on either YouTube or Rumble, depending on the platform of your choice. And we'll be back on Friday for the continuation of our retro review series. We'll have the Dynamite Report in store. And next weekend, we have, I think, a pretty normal schedule for the Monday show, kind of like this week. I'm still going to have to figure out what I want to do about that SummerSlam card. And then the next 2 weeks after that, well, you got the Wembley show, and then you got the All Out show in Chicago. Man, that's going to be tough. I'm going to have to omit something. I'll probably either take out the SmackDown or the Collision Report. Probably end up doing that for the AEW pay-per-views, because that's another one of those circumstances where the Collision show will kind of be redundant by that point. So we'll probably do that. Oh, God. I hate the Sunday night pay-per-views, but that's kind of the model AEW's been running with for a while. So we'll see. I mean, they got most of the card announced for Wembley now. At least I think they do. Let me see here. Just about. They have 4 matches plus the dark match with MJF and Adam Cole wrestling for the Ring of Honor World Tag Belts. I don't think it's not a full card, but it's at least more than half. And then again, All Out is happening the following week after that, which they have 1 match announced for it. That's the Darby Luchasaurus match. So they'll have more stuff coming up in the next week or so. But that's all going to be happening in rapid-fire succession, so they better get their ducks in a row in a hurry, because they don't have a whole lot of time to put together that all-out card. But we'll keep conversing and reconvening as we build to all those shows. And I'll catch you guys on the flip side. Thanks for watching. Peace out.